Everybody, please, huge round of applause for Teresa.
Teresa.
Thank you so much. So when I first was preparing to share my story of postpartum psychosis, I was terrified. And it wasn't because I hadn't spoken in front of a large room, but it was because I never wanted to be the poster child for any kind of illness, much less a mental illness, much less one that is as stigmatized as postpartum psychosis. And so to get past all my, I don't want to do this, I told myself to trust over and over that if it helps just one person, it's worth it. Still, I was relieved when the organizer said, 8 people, that's a good turnout for these talks. But then when I went in to the room, there were 40 chairs set up in the podium, and almost all the chairs were full, and people were still streaming in. And by the time I started my talk, there's a crowd in the back and people along the walls. All the chairs were filled, people sitting in the aisle. And the doorway was so packed that the guy who came to do the filming of it never did because he couldn't get in the door. So I think for a lot of survivors, we use that mantra. And in part, we say it because we want to help people like us. After I gave that talk, I asked for questions, and then I invited anybody who wanted to talk to me personally to come up and talk to me. Well, the person at the end of that long line had to wait almost an hour. That's how many people came up and talked to me. Nobody identified themselves as a survivor. So fast forward a number of years, and I'd shared a number of times, and it's never easy. My story, when I share it, always makes me cry. It has some really hard things about it. The worst part is a hallucination where I kill my child. And I wrote a book that includes my story. And when I was writing it, I was like, I'm putting this in a permanent space to be in any stranger's hands. And I told myself, okay, I'm doing this, and I trust, even if I never learn about it, if it helps just one person. After it was published, I went on television a couple times, had my story in the newspaper, and all of those mentioned a talk I was giving at a local library. So the day of the talk, I had a friend with me, which was rare, but to take photos at this momentous occasion, because I thought this is going to be the biggest crowd ever. So it was a beautiful, gorgeous spring day. And in addition to my usual I don't want is, I hate the winter, and it was warm and lovely, and I just wanted to play hooky. But instead I went into the talk, and there were a number of people filing in, and the librarian showed me to where I was going to be speaking. And it was sort of in an alcove, and there were a big group of seats set up, and the podium, and behind me is this big window looking out over the green with people picnicking and playing Frisbee, and I'm fighting my I don't wannas. And there are 2 people there waiting for it to begin. The librarian leaves, and then she comes back, and she has a stricken look on her face, and it's time to start. And she says, I don't think there's anyone else coming. Do you still want to give the talk? And I thought of my mantra, it helps just one person, even though it seemed a little unlikely that particular time. And but I said, yes, I'll give the talk. So I gave it the way I normally do. And as I'm giving the talk, I'm looking in front of me at the one fellow who was there, and he's got a very sort of open, pleasant look on his face. And I look off to my right, and there's an old woman sitting there. These are my 2 audience members. And she's sitting there with her arms crossed and a scowl on her face. And she looks down every now and then. She looks up, and early on, I thought, oh my gosh, this woman, there was another talk going on that day. I'm figuring that's where all those people who were filing in with me were going. And this poor woman went to the wrong talk and now feels too embarrassed to get up and go because she's half the audience. At the end of the talk, I asked for questions, and the guy in front of me, he didn't have a question, but he thanked me for sharing. And after a pause, the woman then shared her story. She started speaking, this old woman. She had had postpartum psychosis many decades before. She was probably in her 70s, I guess, at the time of my talk. And she said the only people she ever told were her children until this day. And I'm not going to tell her story because that's her story, not mine. But it was so powerful, I think, for everyone there. The librarian had stayed, my friend, the other fellow, and myself, all four of us. But it really did feel like something sacred. And I realized as she shared that if there had been maybe even a half dozen people there, she probably would not have shared. She probably would still be carrying it around. And so that was a very powerful feeling. Sometimes doing this advocacy can be really difficult and frustrating. And I've been doing it for a long time. And sometimes when it's really hard, I think of that woman and her scowling face. She's my poster child for reminding me to trust and helping me know that it does help one person. She is my one person. Thank you.